On Christmas Eve, the city sparkled with lights and festive decorations. Families strolled together, children laughed around illuminated trees, and store windows displayed luxurious items. Yet, amidst the joy, a beggar sat shivering on the sidewalk, holding a cardboard sign that read, "Any help is welcome. God bless you." Among the crowd, a wealthy man walked briskly, carrying bags of expensive gifts. Impeccably dressed, he was on the phone, complaining, "These holidays are just unnecessary expenses. No one values effort and hard work." Despite his successful appearance, there was an emptiness in his expression. The gifts he carried were not for loved ones, but to impress clients and colleagues. He didn't even notice the beggar as he passed, consumed by his own concerns. That night, the man would be forced to confront his choices and understand what the true spirit of Christmas really means. The wealthy man continued his path through the bustling city, lost in his own thoughts. As he crossed a corner, the sound of a humble plea broke through his stream of ideas. Sitting in a dark corner of the sidewalk, the beggar raised his hand, hesitant yet hopeful. His voice was low but steady. "Sir, please, could you help me? I just need something to eat on this Christmas night." There was a disarming sincerity in those words, something capable of touching any heart willing to listen. The man paused briefly, looking the beggar up and down. He noticed the torn clothes, the trembling hands from the cold, and the small cardboard sign with its simple message, "Any help is welcome. God bless you." But instead of compassion, his eyes conveyed judgment. He shook his head, letting out an exasperated sigh. "Why don't you work like everyone else?" he asked in a dry, harsh tone. "It's because of people like you that this city is a mess." The beggar slowly lowered his hand, feeling the weight of rejection once more. His sad gaze fell to the ground, but not before murmuring, "May God bless your journey." Even in the face of indifference, he remained calm, displaying an inner peace that seemed to contradict his situation. The wealthy man, however, failed to notice this detail. He had already moved on, muttering about how the streets were full of beggars and how it ruined the Christmas spirit. As the man continued walking, something inside him began to stir. It wasn't regret, but an irritation that was hard to explain. He justified his actions to himself. "I worked hard to get where I am. If I can do it, anyone can." He replayed the scene in his mind, as if trying to find arguments to validate his attitude. "If I give money to one, they'll all start asking. It's not my responsibility to solve their problems." The beggar, on the other hand, remained seated, observing the activity around him. His hands were nearly frozen, yet he still held the sign, a symbol of his faith and perseverance. People passed by hurriedly. Some avoided eye contact, others pretended not to see him. He knew his presence was an uncomfortable reminder for many, but his soul carried a hope that transcended visible circumstances. In the distance, the Christmas lights shone brightly, contrasting with the darkness of the corner where the beggar sat. To him, those lights represented more than mere decoration. They were a sign that, even on the coldest and loneliest nights, there was something greater guiding his journey. He closed his eyes for a moment, murmuring a silent prayer. Not only for himself, but for all who, like him, faced challenges that Christmas. The wealthy man, however, gave none of this any thought. He continued on his way, oblivious to the impact of his words and actions. To him, the interaction was over, but destiny was just beginning to intervene. At that moment, he had no idea that the beggar was not just an ordinary man, but the key to a lesson that would change his life forever. After walking away from the beggar, the wealthy man continued strolling through the city streets, but something felt different. The lights that had once twinkled cheerfully began to flicker. He looked up, trying to make sense of what was happening. "Power outage," he thought as he continued on his way. But the farther he went, the more streets plunged into darkness. It was as if the shadows were following him, slow and relentless. With the lights disappearing around him, he felt a growing unease. He tried to retrace his steps, but inexplicably, he seemed to be walking in circles. The familiar streets had become disorienting, and no corner led to the destination he sought. It was as if the city itself was trapping him. He stopped for a moment, taking a deep breath, trying to rationalize. I must be more tired than I thought. I need to pull myself together. However, when he checked his shopping bags, he felt a jolt of shock. They were completely empty. Desperate, he opened one of the bags, expecting to find the expensive items he had so carefully selected. Nothing. Not a single object remained. He searched through all the other bags, but the result was the same. "This is impossible," he muttered, panic creeping in. He tried to mentally retrace his steps, looking for some logical explanation, but there was none. Only a growing sense that something beyond his control was unfolding. As the night grew colder, he began to feel something he hadn't felt in years: vulnerability. His expensive coat seemed insufficient to keep him warm, and the weight of loneliness began to press on him in a tangible way. As he wandered aimlessly, a strange sensation of being watched overtook him. He looked around, but the streets were empty. Yet, whispers began to float around him, soft but unmistakable. The voices didn't address him directly, but echoed words he had heard earlier. "Sir, please, could you help me?" The beggar's plea played over and over in his mind, like an uncomfortable memory he couldn't shake. He shook his head, trying to dismiss it, but the whispers persisted, blending with other words that seemed to emerge from the depths of his conscience. "You were blessed to be a blessing." With each step, the man felt the weight of solitude grow heavier. The streets, once lively and vibrant, now seemed utterly deserted. He glanced around, searching for a familiar face or even a stranger who might help him, but there was no one. It was as though he had been left alone in an empty world, directionless and purposeless. Finally, he stopped at a street corner, his hands in his pockets and his breath visible in the icy air. For the first time that night, he allowed himself to admit he was afraid. What had initially seemed like a mere inconvenience now felt like a warning. But a warning of what? He didn't know, and that terrified him. The words he had spoken to the beggar echoed back in his mind, cruel and unrelenting. "Why don't you work like everyone else?" He flinched, feeling the weight of his own indifference. But he still struggled to grasp what was happening. The cold, the loneliness, and the darkness created a setting where he could no longer escape his own thoughts. What had seemed like just another Christmas night was beginning to turn into something inexplicable. He didn't yet realize it, but he was undergoing a test, and the outcome would depend on the choices he made from that moment forward. After wandering aimlessly through the dark streets, the wealthy man decided to return to the place where he had last seen the beggar. There was something about that encounter he couldn't shake from his mind. He hoped to find some kind of answer, or at least a starting point to understand what was happening. As he approached, he noticed something different. The corner where the beggar had been now seemed illuminated by a soft, almost celestial light, entirely out of place on that cold, dark night. As he drew closer, he saw the beggar still sitting there. But something about him had changed. He was no longer merely a humble man shivering in the cold, but a figure radiating peace and authority. Slowly, the beggar stood up, leaving the cardboard sign on the ground. His posture was upright, and his eyes shone with a supernatural light. When he spoke, his voice was calm but echoed as if coming from something far greater than himself. "You were tested tonight. God gave you a chance to show compassion, but you chose indifference." The wealthy man took a step back, startled and confused. "What do you mean? Who are you?" he asked, his voice trembling between disbelief and fear. The beggar gave a slight smile, but didn't answer directly. Instead, he raised his hand, and before the man's eyes, scenes began to unfold like visions projected into the air. He saw an alternate version of that night. himself stopping to help the beggar, buying him food and a warm coat. He saw the beggar thanking him with tears in his eyes, wishing blessings upon his life. As he watched, the man felt something strange in his chest. It wasn't pain, but a tightness, as if something within him was being confronted for the first time. "This is what could have been," the beggar said, his voice gentle yet firm. "A simple gesture could have transformed both your night and mine. You would have experienced the true joy of Christmas, but you chose to ignore it." The vision shifted again, this time showing the ripple effect of that alternate choice. He saw himself no longer rushed and dissatisfied, but genuinely happy. He saw how that small act of kindness reflected into other areas of his life, inspiring him to be more generous and connected with those around him. The man watched silently, unable to look away. Tears began to well up in his eyes, but he still didn't know what to say or do. "But why?" he finally asked, his voice choked with emotion. "Why me? I'm not a bad person. I work hard. I do what's expected." The beggar took a step closer, looking directly into his eyes. "It's not about being good or bad. It's about choosing love over indifference, generosity over judgment. Tonight, you were given an opportunity to make a difference, but you chose to walk away. God doesn't ask for perfection, only a heart willing to listen and to help." The wealthy man fell to his knees, the weight of his choices bearing down on him. The light around the beggar seemed to envelop him as well, as if exposing him to a truth he had long avoided. The beggar continued, "Your wealth, your possessions, all of it is temporary. What remains is the impact you leave on others. The true spirit of Christmas isn't in expensive gifts, but in sharing love, compassion, and hope." The vision ended, and the light around the beggar began to fade. He looked one last time at the man kneeling before him and said, "I hope you use this lesson to change. There is still time, but not forever." In an instant, the beggar disappeared, leaving only the cardboard sign behind. The wealthy man remained on the ground, his heart heavy with the words he had heard and the images he had seen. For the first time, he realized his life needed to change, and that change depended entirely on him. Alone in the now silent street, the wealthy man remained on his knees, unable to fully process what had just happened. The words of the beggar, or was it an angel, echoed in his mind, each striking him like a direct blow to the heart. For the first time in years, he felt profound regret. The emptiness he had ignored for so long, hiding behind his wealth and status, now rose to the surface. Tears began to stream down his face, warm against the cold of the night. He stood up slowly, as if the weight of his past choices pressed heavily on his shoulders. Looking around, the street appeared the same as before, bright and bustling, yet something inside him had shifted. Instead of apathy, he felt a mix of shame and a yearning for redemption. He walked back to where the beggar had been sitting earlier, but all he found was the small cardboard sign, still bearing the words, "Any help is welcome. God bless you." Clutching the sign in his hands, he reflected on what he had seen. The visions were not just of missed opportunities, but also of a future he could create if he chose to change. "I didn't know. I truly didn't know," he murmured to himself, the words laden with sorrow. But deep down, he realized he had ignored signs for years. How many times had he walked past similar situations, always justifying his indifference? How many people had he judged without knowing their stories? His regret began to transform into an urgent need for action. He knew he couldn't undo what had happened, but he could start to make amends. In his heart, he felt this was more than a warning, it was a second chance. "Please, God," he said aloud, his eyes closed and his hands gripping the sign tightly. "If there's a way to make this right, show me the path. I don't want to live this way anymore. I want to make a difference." As he remained there in prayer, something strange happened. The intense cold he had felt seemed to fade, replaced by a sense of warmth and lightness. It wasn't physical, but spiritual. For the first time in years, he felt a genuine connection to something greater than himself. There were no immediate answers or miraculous signs, but he knew a new journey had begun within him. That night, the man returned home, but the luxurious mansion that once felt like a sanctuary now seemed cold and lifeless. He sat on the sofa, looking around and noticing, for the first time, how everything around him was material, yet devoid of meaning. He remembered the beggar's words, "Your wealth is worth nothing if your heart is empty." And finally, he understood the profound truth behind those words. The regret he felt was painful, but it was also the first step towards something greater. He knew it wasn't enough to feel sorry or sad. He had to act. He grabbed an old notebook covered in dust and began jotting down ideas for how he could help people like the beggar, those who faced challenges every day. It wasn't just about donations or superficial charity. It was about creating something meaningful that could truly impact lives. As he wrote, he remembered hearing about the e-book Light in Darkness, Finding Hope at Christmas. It was said to be a guide to overcoming fear, finding purpose, and reconnecting with God. He realized he needed these tools, not only for himself, but to understand how to help others. The thought of seeking that knowledge became a cornerstone for his journey of transformation. He spent the rest of the night reflecting and planning. The man who would wake up the next morning would not be the same. He was determined to no longer be someone who walked past others in indifference, but to become someone who shared love, compassion, and hope, not just at Christmas, but every single day. The next morning, the wealthy man woke up with a different feeling. The weight he had carried the night before felt lighter, but the urgency to act remained. He decided that from that day forward, his life would take a new direction. Without wasting time, he dressed and set out to find practical ways to make a difference. He started by returning to the place where he had met the beggar the night before. Though the beggar was no longer there, he found others in similar situations, tired faces marked by the cold and abandonment. Without hesitation, he entered a nearby bakery and bought as much bread and hot drinks as he could carry. Returning to the streets, he began distributing the food. But this time, he didn't simply hand it out and move on. He stopped, listened to stories, and asked questions. He discovered that each person had a unique journey, filled with challenges and interrupted dreams. Some had lost jobs, others were fleeing abusive relationships, and some were struggling with mental health issues. For the first time, the wealthy man realized that there was so much more behind every face than he had ever imagined. Throughout the day, he continued his mission, but the transformation wasn't just in what he did, it was in what he felt. Each grateful smile and every word of hope he shared filled a void in his heart that had once seemed insatiable. He realized that true happiness wasn't found in what he owned, but in what he could share. The beggar's words began to make sense on a deeper level. The true spirit of Christmas is love for others. Inspired by the immediate impact he was making, he decided his actions needed to go beyond a one-time gesture. Returning home, he began to plan something bigger. Using his wealth, he created a fund dedicated to helping vulnerable people. This fund provided shelter, meals, medical care, and guidance for social reintegration. For him, it was no longer about charity, but about restoring the dignity of the people he once ignored. As he worked on his new initiative, he remembered hearing about the e-book Light in Darkness, Finding Hope at Christmas. Intrigued, he decided to purchase it, seeking inspiration to deepen his spiritual transformation. As he read, he found biblical reflections that seemed to speak directly to his journey. The book explored how to overcome fear and anxiety, themes he had never openly confronted before, but now understood were essential for his own peace and for helping others find theirs. The e-book also featured testimonies that touched him deeply. Stories of people who, by applying its teachings, had found strength to overcome loss, restore relationships, and reconnect with God. These stories motivated him to share the material with others, convinced it could be a tool for transformation not only for himself, but for many. As the days passed, his social circle began to notice the change. Colleagues and acquaintances were surprised by his new demeanor. He was no longer the cold, calculating man they once knew, but someone willing to listen, help, and invest his time in causes that truly mattered. Some questioned him, others criticized him, but he remained steadfast. "It's not about what people think of me," he said during a business meeting. "It's about what I can do for others." To solidify his transformation, he began dedicating his time to community organizations. He participated in events, visited orphanages and hospitals, and promoted initiatives with direct impact. He did this not to be seen or recognized, but because every action was an opportunity to reconnect with something greater than himself. In all these activities, he found the joy and peace he had long sought in vain through material possessions. The following Christmas arrived, and he spent the day at a community center he had helped establish. He handed out gifts to underprivileged children, spoke with families in need, and served hot meals. At the end of the day, he sat beside one of the volunteers and, for the first time, shared his story. "There was a time when I didn't understand the true meaning of Christmas," he said, "but one encounter changed everything. I realized that true wealth is found in giving, not in accumulating." As he gazed at the Christmas lights, now glowing with a completely new meaning to him, he knew there was still much work to be done. But for the first time, he felt truly alive, guided by a greater purpose. That Christmas night, the wealthy man found something no expensive gift could ever offer: purpose, connection, and love for others. He left behind a self-centered life to embrace the true spirit of Christmas, a spirit that redeems and transforms. From that day on, he became a light in the darkness for many, spreading hope where there was once only indifference. He not only changed his own story, but began to impact the lives of those around him, becoming a living example that it is never too late to choose a new path. Over time, his initiative grew. He founded projects that not only fed and sheltered those in need, but also helped them rebuild their lives. He became a beacon in his community, someone who had turned his pain and emptiness into a mission of love and compassion. But most importantly, he found peace with himself and with God, something that had always eluded him, even during his moments of greatest material success. As he reflected on his journey, he thought about how it all began with a seemingly simple encounter. A beggar, with a humble request, had opened his eyes to truths he had long ignored. He finally understood that true wealth lies in sharing, and that every small act of kindness is a seed that can bloom and transform lives. And you, as you watch this story, have you ever thought about how small choices can make a tremendous difference in someone's life? This Christmas, take a moment to reflect on how you can be that difference. It might be a simple smile, a kind word, or even reaching out to someone in need. Never underestimate the impact of a single act of love. If you want to delve deeper into this reflection and learn how to transform your spiritual life, especially in difficult times, I encourage you to explore Light in the Darkness, Finding Hope at Christmas. This ebook is more than a guide. It's a journey that can help you overcome fears and uncertainties, reconnect with God, and find purpose and peace. I created this material with people like you in mind, those who want to live with more confidence and serenity, especially during this special season. You'll find the link pinned in the comments. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who might also be inspired by this message. And finally, don't miss the video appearing on your screen now. It features more heartwarming stories that will warm your soul. Thank you so much for being here, and remember, true wealth lies in what we share. Merry Christmas.